Chapter 31. The morning after the game night, Eiji found another note on the table. Dearest Eiji, thank you again for last night. I had such a wonderful time, and I'm not sure I did the best job of explaining why it made you so happy that you killed me, so let me try here. It made me feel like you were allowing me to be part of the game and treating me as your friend. Whatever else I hope to be to you, I always want to be your friend as well. Thank you for letting me have that. All of last night was such a precious gift. Even as I write this, I can't stop grinning at the memory of that gleam in your eye as you beat us all. I love your competitive spirit and the joy you take in winning. No wonder you won my heart so Ignore that. Goodness, I'm embarrassing. I'll be lucky if you can even make eye contact with me when you get home. But I can't waste the paper by tearing this up, and I'm out of time to write more, so I just have to hope that you'll forgive me for being a soppy fool and still allow me to kiss you this evening. There really is nothing in the world as wonderful as kissing you. Yours, Felix. Eiji deposited the note with the rest of his growing collection and set off for the galley with his face burning. He would be a little early, but he needed to get out of his master's rooms. If he let himself stay there with all his wonderful notes, he would just read them over and over again and work himself into a commotion. He was so ridiculous. Good morning, Eiji, Rokuro called as he entered the kitchen, waving him over with a big smile. I've got your breakfast here. Eiji took the plate gratefully. How did you know I'd be here? I'm not supposed to start until lunch. You're always early when Lord Felix is in the elder rooms. Rokuro shrugged. I figured you get bored sitting around without him. Not bored, just tempted to obsess over the half-dozen notes my master has left me. You see, if I were just a little bolder, I would almost dare to call them love letters. Luckily, Norio passed by at that moment and provided Eiji with the perfect distraction from this potentially awkward conversation. Norio, however, received his greeting with an exaggerated sniff. I'm not speaking to you. You're bloodthirsty. He's allowed to beat you at a card game, Rokuro laughed. Why was he laughing? This was awful. Eiji had been so focused on worrying about whether his aggressive playing style was upsetting Lord Felix, he'd completely forgotten to monitor everyone else. Is beat really the right word? Moaned Norio. I would say annihilated, obliterated, maybe destroyed. Eiji drew in a shaky breath. I'm sorry, I didn't... Oh, no! Norio turned to him with wide eyes, and Eiji flinched until the smaller man grabbed his hands. I'm so sorry. I was teasing, Eiji. Of course I'm not upset with you. We had fun last night. The knots in Eiji's stomach loosened enough for him to start feeling foolish over his reaction. Why did he always jump to the worst possible conclusion? I think it's wonderful you have a cutthroat side, Rokuro announced. Someone needs to look out for poor Lord Felix so he won't get walked on. I'm glad he has someone a little bit ruthless to protect him. It was a laughable statement. Even if Eiji's competitive streak with games somehow translated to real-life brutality, Lord Felix would hardly need his protection. His, or anyone else's. He was huge, battle-seasoned, and a wielder of divine powers. Even compared to the other gods, Eiji was sure he had never met anyone so utterly invulnerable as his own master. What about you? Now that Eiji was no longer sputtering out his inanity, Norio's attention returned to the baker. Who protects you, Rokuro? Don't you need somebody ruthless? Rokuro smiled and flexed an arm. It was incredibly impressive, and would have been even more so if Eiji hadn't been used to Lord Felix's bulk. I'm the ruthless one around here, Rokuro boasted. Every cup of flour on the ship knows better than to cross me. This was Edgy's chance to join the verbal game, to say something clever and funny, and show them that they were right to let him hang around. Surely even he could come up with some kind of joke about Flower. He opened his mouth, heart racing. "That would scare me more if Flower could think," he said, his voice too loud. Damn it! What was that supposed to be? A joke? He was so pathetic. Because Flower can't know things, he fumbled, trying desperately to think of some way to salvage this. So how does it know to be afraid of you? Rokuro didn't bat an eye. Makes it even more impressive, doesn't it? See, Norio, I'm so terrifying, even the inanimate objects flee before me. Yes, all right, you're very scary. Norio rolled his eyes. Stop encouraging him, Edgy. They kept up their easy banter all morning, but Edgy contented himself with listening and didn't try to interject again. The more he listened, the more likely he was to be able to replicate this kind of teasing one day. At least with them. He didn't know how he would ever find the courage to banter with Lord Felix like this, though he knew his master would enjoy it. But perhaps that was all right. He was still pleasing Lord Felix, even if he didn't understand how. There would be time to learn to tease. It was his day to deliver to the back quarter of rooms, the section where Lord Antony lived. Edgy found, to his own surprise, that the prospect was not as daunting as it had once been. He didn't think about his old master nearly as much as he used to. Why should he? His new lord wrote him notes, kissed him, called him wonderful. As he approached the door, he ran through all his little grounding mantras. The cart is solid and real. It is here because I work for Zenji. I work for Zenji because Lord Felix allows it. Lord Felix allows me to work in the kitchens because he's pleased with me. I belong to Lord Felix now. Automatically, with a lack of urgency that made his chest swell proudly. He was so much calmer, so much more in control of himself these days. His hand didn't even shake as he knocked on his former master's door. There was some noise coming from inside the room, but it took him a moment to recognize the new offering's voice. It was high and jagged. Crying? Is he crying? Edgy pushed at the door, praying that it would be locked and he could walk away in good conscience. He didn't know how to comfort a crying person. With Lord Felix, he just stammered a lot and then climbed into his lap. That didn't seem likely to work in this case. But now that he'd been proved right, he couldn't just leave that poor boy to suffer alone. It might have taken Lord Antony longer to tire of this offering, but he clearly had, and now perhaps the boy would be ready to listen to Edgy when he told him that it wasn't his fault. There had never been a way to keep Lord Antony's attention. Lord Antony! Oh gods, what if he's there? What if this is a punishment? Edgy had never been disciplined by his former master, so the most obvious explanation for loud tears only occurred to him once it was already too late, the door swinging open under his hand. He froze, ready to fling himself down and beg forgiveness if he was interrupting a punishment, but the sight that met his eyes was so unexpected that he could only stand, gaping. Clammy chills chased one another up and down his body, ice settling into his veins as he stared. The new offering was crying all right, his face wet and shiny in the torchlight, and chattering unintelligibly through his tears. He was spinning around in an awkward, graceless mockery of a dance. And hoisted up above his head, legs dangling several feet off the floor, he held... Edgy knew at once that it was Lord Antony, but even so, his mind would not accept the facts that bounced and spun before his eyes. The god's long silver braid was whipping around, and the glimpses Edgy caught of his face, he couldn't begin to interpret them. His eyes were wide, and his thin lips seemed to quirk up helplessly at the corners. But that was as impossible as the rest of this mad dream. Lord Antony never smiled. While Eiji gawked, rooted to his place, the new offering's garbled noises resolved into words he could understand. Thank you, thank you, thank you! This is the best! You're the best, Antony! That last was a barely articulate squeal, as though the 3 syllables of the god's name somehow served as a substitute for every word of joy in the world. It also drew a realization from the stunned fog of Eji's mind. He's calling a god by name. A hysterical chuckle clawed its way up Eji's throat and emerged as a strangled croak. As if that were the strangest thing happening right now. His broken little noise must have been louder than he thought, because the 2 men stopped spinning and stared at him. Forgive me, he stammered automatically, unable even to feel his own mouth moving. I knocked, and I thought, did you say to come in? The big beaming offering and the dark little god in his arms just kept staring at him, as if he were the shocking thing, the disruption, the blasphemer. Lord Antony grunted, and at the sound of his voice, all of Eji's attention focused on him, the rest of the world dwindling into nothing, as it always had. I'm just a dog, forever primed and hoping for its one true master, too stupid to realize it's been thrown into the streets. This one's been saying so many things, I wouldn't be surprised, the god huffed, and Eiji just stared helplessly at him, yearning for some kind of explanation. The offering's voice sliced into him like a blade, high and joyous, a happy squeal. Antony's keeping me! I get to stay! Ah, perhaps Eiji didn't want an explanation after all. Maybe Lord Antony had threatened to trade him for one of the others and then let himself be talked out of it. Maybe he accepted this offering on a probationary period and has decided to let him serve out his term. Maybe... Eji's desperate mind could vomit up all the explanations it wanted, but it was no use. He knew what the new offering meant. Lord Antony was going to keep him for life. Lord Antony let him use his name, let him pick him up and spin him, touched him and saw him, and even now had one slender hand clinging to his broad shoulder. The new offering could take these liberties because Lord Antony was going to keep him and treasure him like this, always. And Eiji had been ready to soothe this boy's tears, smug in his certainty that he had been rejected through no fault of his own. Stupid! So fucking stupid! I let Lord Felix's softness go to my head. As if he would ever come right out and admit what a useless, worthless fuck-up I am. But he knows. Everyone knows. Eiji felt strange as he moved to set the tray on the table, floating and airy and untouchable. He bowed low. I see. Even his voice sounded light and calm. Congratulations. Forgive me for the disturbance, my lord. He backed out of the room and shut the door softly behind himself. Then he returned to his cart and pushed it briskly down the hall, immersing himself in the rhythms of his work. The priests were wrong. He'd never thought such a thing before, but in his current state, it came to him easy and ireless. They have no idea what the gods want. None of them wanted the polished manners and abject submission that Eiji had been drilled in until they were second nature. They wanted impiety. They wanted to be called by name and taken liberties with. Eji's stupid, stuffy formality wasn't only distasteful to Lord Felix, it had also been displeasing to his first master. He'd been thrown away because of it. The things Lord Felix didn't like about him were not just unpleasant to one god, they were wrong. It made sense. It confirmed what he'd suspected for all of his adult life. He was deficient in every possible way. A natural attendant would have intuited his master's desires and fulfilled them. Gods, he had known what Lord Felix wanted from him since the first game night, but he had let himself be lulled by his master's softness and patience into believing that he had time to work himself up to it. He believed that he had the right to that time, the right to delay his obedience, to pick and choose when to make himself into what his God wanted him to be. His own selfish insolence was enough to shock the breath from his lungs. He'd been so wrong. Eiji listened to Rokuro and Norio's chatter for the rest of his shift. He smiled and laughed at the right times, and groaned with them when Bunta came to visit and gave Zenji a long, lingering kiss. But all afternoon, half his mind kept busily sorting through the implications of his epiphany. Seeing Lord Antony and the new offering had shocked him, yes, but it was also a reminder of the rewards that could come from obedience. Lord Felix is going to use me tonight. Perhaps it was presumptuous of him to assume so much, but his gut told him that he was right. He'd known how to convince his master to use him since his conversation with Zenji on the subject. He just lacked the will, the motivation to go through with it. No more. The thought drew at the corners of his mouth. Several of the other workers stared at him in surprise as he finished his duties, but the little smile stayed in place. Why should he hide his happiness? He was going to go to Lord Felix and earn his place and undo all of his mistakes. It was a thing to celebrate. Damn, Eiji! Zenji gave him an answering grin as he bade the older man good night. You must have something fun planned for the evening. I certainly do.